Hello again everyone and welcome back to some familiar territory along the CSX W&A subdivision for the first time in quite a while. Summertime had finally arrived here in northern Georgia, which meant more time for us rail fans trackside as school was finally out, which would be the case for me on June 19th, 2024, starting out just north of Ackworth, waiting on southbound manifest M541, which should have quite the neat lash-up on this day, with a YN2 AC 4400 leading an SD70 Mac and a Tier 4 Gevo, with a not too terribly long consist in tow, as a Cartersville defect detector would clock this one in only 292 axles.
4118, clear, north Ackworth, stop now.
.541 would be meeting an opposing northbound empty grain train G824 at Moon, and we knew he'd be running up the Ottawa sub, so we'd move up to Wyvern to catch him at track speed. Now just north of Wyvern, it wouldn't take long at all for G824 to get up to us as it flies north with its string of empty grain hoppers coming out of Comer, Georgia, heading back to Weberville, Michigan. Now back over on the W&A side, we would find M281 heading south through downtown Adairsville as it heads for Atlanta and eventually Greenwood, South Carolina. We would then move on up to Resaca to set up for southbound manifest M647, but what we did not know was that the dispatcher was going to hold them on the main at South Resaca for a local turn job L809 to go around them in the siding. So after we caught M647 here, we'd move on up to Tilton to catch L809 heading back north towards Dalton. Finally, after over an hour of waiting on L809, as it had been working an industry down the tracks that we had no idea about, it would finally head on north with a solo SD70 Mac number 4536 leading the way Longhood forward as it heads back towards Dalton to finish its work for the day. Everything would then go dead for the next few hours until I was heading back south, reaching the outskirts of Adairsville, when I heard what sounded like a train coming north. Then I heard this over the radio.
97421, E30219, 3024 Foxworth. Release starting on tracks SGC633.0. V&A Expo in Cartersville sub at 1819 DEG.
Once I heard that, I knew he wouldn't be far out at all, so I'd pull off to the nearest crossing I could get to, which would be at the Gordon holdout signal, where I would set up for our northbound empty coal train E302, coming out of Plant Bowen, headed back to Evansville, Indiana. Just over an hour later, set up in downtown Adairsville once again, we'd be waiting on southbound Manifest M515, as it had just met the E302 that we caught earlier at Resaca. Rolling down the hill towards Martin Marietta, 515 would be lined into the siding with a medium approach to meet an opposing northbound, which I did not know what train it was just yet. Now at the south end of Martin Marietta, M515 is stopped in the siding and a high green is lit for our northbound. This night's 515 was so long, they didn't even know if they were going to fit into the siding, as the dispatcher was telling them how many more cars they needed to fit into the siding, and when they finally came to a stop, they only had about 300 more feet to spare between the last car and the north end signal. Now rolling past M515 on the main, this northbound will turn out to be M582, daily manifest traffic out of Hamlet, North Carolina to Radnor Yard in Nashville, Tennessee. Just seconds after 582 cleared the switch, M515 will get the medium clear out of the siding and back onto the main line to continue its trip south towards Atlanta and Waycross.
Total axle 656, end of transmission.
With the sun now almost fully gone for the day, we set up one last time for M515 just north of Kingston as he rolls south at track speed through the northern Georgia farmland under a full moon. Once M515 passed me here, I would head on home as I had over an hour drive to get back, and all the sunlight was pretty much gone. but we'd be back out just a few days later for another full day of North Georgia rail fanning. I would then head back out just 2 days later on June 21st, starting out the day at the north end of Resaca, set up for southbound Autorack and intermodal train I-141 as it flies south through here at track speed towards Atlanta and eventually Duval Yard in Jacksonville. We would be lucky on this day catching 141 in daylight just after 11 a.m. as it usually runs overnight. We would then head north towards Dalton, arriving just south of town at the Five Springs Road crossing, as the gates would activate no more than 2 minutes after we arrived. The train would be a northbound NS Manifest, which I have no idea what the symbol was on this one, with 3 GE motors at the head end and quite the friendly crew in the cab. About 2 miles to the north of here, the NS Manifest would meet southbound CSX Manifest M583 coming out of Chattanooga. 583 has since cleared the diamond in downtown Dalton, which means the NS Manifest now has priority across to head into Chattanooga. This day's 583 would be powered by an AC 4400 and 2 GVOs, all on the YN3B paint scheme. Next up, back at Tilton, would be southbound tie train W201, with a solo DC GEVO leading Longco forward with a string of gondolas behind him. W201 would make many journeys up and down the W&A during the summer, picking up old ties along the way. On this day, 201 was headed south towards Calhoun and Kingston, before tying down in the very rarely used Halls siding between Kingston and Adairsville. At one time, many years ago, Halls was signaled, but it was so short CSX decided to take the signals out and rip out the switch at the south end. We would then head over to the NS at Sugar Valley, and it wouldn't take long for our first train to show up, being northbound 188 out of East Point, Georgia for Detroit, Michigan. Not far behind 188 would be hotshot northbound intermodal 26C, coming out of Jacksonville, Florida, headed back to Chicago, Illinois. About 20 minutes behind 26C would be another northbound, this one being a manifest that I did not get the symbol of, with an SD70 Ace and a -9 at the head end. We would then leave Sugar Valley and head back over to the W&A, where we would almost immediately pick up a train over the radio coming north. So we'd set up just north of Adairsville at the intermediate signal to Martin Marietta for M582, out of Hamlet, North Carolina, up to Radnor Yard in Nashville, Tennessee. M582 would be meeting southbound M281 at Resaca, which is a train that we'd been waiting on for quite a while, as we heard earlier in the day that it had a YN2 leader. 281 would finally reach us here in downtown Adairsville just after 6:30 p.m., and for some reason he was lined into the siding at Martin Marietta. Now usually that would be normal, but the odd thing about this is that I didn't know of anything coming up behind 582, as I knew nothing was coming off of the Cartersville sub and nothing was turning around at Cartersville coming off the Etowah sub to come north. So I had no idea what train they were meeting, and all I can say for now is this train was a very weird one and something that I may not ever see again.
Equipment defect detector. Milepost 67.62. No defects. No defects. Total axle 468. End of transmission.
Arriving at the south end of Martin Marietta, we thought we would have plenty of time to get out and set up, as we hadn't heard anything over the radio. But as we were about to cross the tracks, the crossings would activate and our train would be right on top of us. So I'd get out of my car as fast as possible to set up for him. At this time, I still had no idea what this train was. I never heard him call out any signals on the radio, but one thing I did notice was the lead motor of this train I had seen earlier in the day at Cartersville switching at Wyvern, which made me begin to wonder if this train for some reason had come out of Cartersville. And sure enough, I'd be right. This train would be symboled U802, as I would come to find out later into the night, which is an extra symbol for L802, which is a fairly new local that runs out of Howell Yard in Atlanta up to Wauhatchie a couple times a week. And for some reason this one would start in Cartersville, as it would completely empty Junta Yard, North Yard, and possibly Wyvern. But I honestly still don't even know why this train was made. Possibly it could be so other trains wouldn't have to pick up the traffic in Cartersville for the next few days to take to Chattanooga, or maybe they just needed to free up some space in Cartersville. But honestly, I don't even know, and these are just guesses. But this is a very cool sight to see, as from my knowledge, I've never heard of this train running before, and it may never happen again. This whole scenario reminds me of an instance that happened about 2 years ago. I was set up in downtown Adairsville late at night waiting on a southbound. The train that I would catch would be symboled X603, which was a very oddball Wauhatchie, Tennessee to Winston, Florida manifest. And from what I know, that was the one and only time that train ever ran. With U802 out of the way now, M281 would get the medium clear out of Martin Marietta and back onto the main line. So we'd head south towards Kingston, as it wouldn't take them long to get out of the siding and start moving again. And by the time it got to us, it'd be doing every bit of track speed. After M281, everything would go pretty much quiet until about an hour and a half later, until we would reach the north end of Emerson, where a high green would be lit up for our northbound. And no more than 5 minutes after our arrival, we'd hear our train call clear at the south end of Emerson, being M542, daily manifest out of Rice Yard and Waycross, headed up to Cincinnati, Ohio. After catching 542 at Emerson, we'd move about a mile up the road to set up for one last train, being southbound manifest M647, as it was waiting on the W&A side at Jenna for 542 to get onto the Etowah sub before heading south. Now with 542 out of the way, 647 heads south for Atlanta and eventually Waycross, as the last bit of light begins to fade away on the longest day of the year. This would bring an end to a very action-packed June for me, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I did. As usually, I don't catch this many trains in just 2 outings, but I thank y'all for sticking around through this over half-hour long video as we explored some new and familiar territory in the northern Georgia region. But until we meet again, this is Georgia Rail Productions saying so long from Emerson, Georgia along the CSX W&A subdivision.